Mommy, if we eat today, will we starve tomorrow? Lily's voice was so small it almost disappeared under the soft tapping of rain on the windshield, but it still cut through me like something sharp and quiet, the kind that doesn't bleed right away but stays, and I couldn't answer her, not because I didn't know, but because I did, and the truth felt too heavy to put into words as I gripped the steering wheel of my old Honda, the gas light glowing steady for the past 15 miles, the engine off now to save whatever fumes we had left, the parking lot around us nearly empty except for a flickering streetlight that buzzed like it was barely holding on, just like me, and I stared straight ahead, pretending I was thinking of a plan, pretending I was still in control, while Lily shifted beside me in the passenger seat, her small sneakers tapping nervously against the floor mat, her coat zipped all the way up even though it wasn't that cold, because she'd learned to make herself smaller when she was scared, and that broke something in me more than hunger ever could. And if we go back, she whispered again, her voice trembling this time, he'll hit you again, right? I closed my eyes for a second too long, my fingers tightening around the worn leather until my knuckles turned pale, because she wasn't supposed to understand things like that. She wasn't supposed to calculate safety like it was some kind of math problem with no right answer. She was 6 years old, and yet here she was, weighing food against fear, and I felt like I had already failed her in every possible way. Hey, I said finally, forcing my voice to stay steady as I turned toward her. Brushing a strand of light brown hair away from her face, we're not going back. The words came out softer than I intended, but they were the only promise I had left to give, even if I didn't know how I was going to keep it, because the truth was, I had $23 in my wallet, no phone signal, no place to go, and a past that didn't like being left behind, and the silence that followed stretched too long, thick with everything I wasn't saying, until Lily nodded slowly, like she was trying to believe me even when she wasn't sure she could, and she leaned her head against my arm, her warmth grounding me in a way nothing else could, and I realized right then that I wasn't scared of being broke. I wasn't scared of sleeping in this car or skipping meals or figuring it out one day at a time. What I was scared of was ever letting her think that going back was an option, that fear was normal, that this was what life was supposed to feel like. And I couldn't let that happen, not again, not ever so. I reached for the glove compartment, pulling out the last granola bar I had saved without telling her, breaking it in half and handing her the bigger piece, watching the way her eyes lit up just a little, like I had given her something more than food. Like I had given her hope, and maybe that was enough for tonight, maybe that was all I could give, but as I leaned back in my seat, staring up at the rain-streaked sky through the cracked windshield, I didn't notice the black SUV parked across the lot, engine running, headlights off, or the man inside who hadn't taken his eyes off us since the moment Lily asked that question, because if I had, I might have realized that for the first time since we ran, someone else had heard it too. And he wasn't the kind of man who ignored things like that. The rain did not stop, it only softened, turning into a steady whisper against the glass that made everything feel slower, heavier, like the world was holding its breath along with me, and I kept my eyes on the empty parking lot even though there was nothing to see. Just faded white lines and puddles reflecting the broken streetlight, but something felt different now, something I could not explain, like the quiet was not just quiet anymore, like it was watching, and I shifted slightly in my seat, adjusting the worn jacket around Lily as she leaned against me, her breathing finally steady, her small hand still clutching the half of the granola bar she had not finished, saving it for later like she already understood that later might not come with anything else, and that thought made my chest tighten in a way I could not shake, so I reached over and gently brushed her hair again, more for me than for her, grounding myself in something real, something mine, and I told myself to think, to figure out the next step, because sitting here was not a plan. It was just delaying the moment when reality would catch up again, but every option led back to the same place, the same door I had walked out of 2 nights ago, the same voice I refused to hear again, and I shook my head slightly, pushing that thought away before it could take root, because going back was not survival, it was surrender, and I had already chosen once. I was not choosing that again, not with her sitting beside me, not with her trusting me to know the difference. And that was when headlights flickered briefly across the rearview mirror, not bright, not intrusive, just enough to make me glance up, just enough to notice the outline of a vehicle parked farther back in the shadows. A black SUV I did not remember seeing before, its engine running low, almost silent, like it had been there longer than I realized, and for a second, my body tensed on instinct, that old reflex I had learned too well, the one that told me to leave, to move, to disappear before being noticed, but the headlights did not move. The car did not approach, it just stayed there, still and patient, and I told myself it was nothing, just someone waiting, just another person with their own problems, their own reasons for being in a place like this at this hour, and yet I could not shake the feeling that it was more than that whoever sat inside was not just passing time, and I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to look away, because paranoia would not help me, fear would not feed my child or find us a place to sleep. And I needed to stay focused on what mattered, so I reached for my wallet again, counting the bills for the third time like the numbers might change if I stared long enough. $23 and some loose change, enough for a cheap meal, maybe a few gallons of gas if I found a station still open, not enough for a motel, not enough for anything stable, and I felt that familiar pressure building behind my ribs, the one that came when I was running out of options. But before it could take over, Lily stirred beside me, her voice soft and drowsy as she looked up at me with eyes that still trusted. "Are we okay?" she asked, and I swallowed hard, forcing a small smile that felt steadier than I expected. "We are," I said, and this time I meant it differently, not because everything was solved, not because I had a plan, but because for the first time since we left, I felt like something had shifted. Like the world had tilted just enough to give us a chance, even if I did not understand why, even if I did not know how. And across the lot, inside that silent black SUV, a man watched the way I held my daughter like she was the only thing keeping me standing. And he did not look away. I did not realize how quiet it had become until the sound of my own breathing started to feel too loud, like it did not belong in that space, and I shifted in my seat again, my eyes drifting back to the rearview mirror without meaning to, searching for something I could not name, and the black SUV was still there, unchanged, unmoving, like it had been placed there deliberately and left to wait, and a strange thought crossed my mind that made my stomach tighten, the kind of thought I would have ignored before, but not anymore. Not after everything, because now I noticed things, I paid attention to what did not make sense, and there was something about that car that did not feel random, not at this hour. Not in a near-empty lot where most people had already gone home, and I forced myself to look away again, telling myself that not everything was a threat, that not every shadow meant danger, but my fingers still tightened slightly around the steering wheel. And I became aware of how exposed we were, sitting here with no engine running, no quick escape, just two figures in a car that had seen better days, and I hated that feeling more than anything, the feeling of being seen when I had nowhere to go, and I reached for the key, turning it halfway just to bring the dashboard lights back to life, not starting the engine yet, just reminding myself that I could leave if I needed to, that I was not trapped, even if it felt that way. And beside me, Lily shifted again, her small voice breaking through my thoughts as she sat up a little, rubbing her eyes. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked softly. And I hesitated for a second too long, because the truth was I still did not know, and that hesitation did not go unnoticed, not by her, not by the part of me that knew she was watching how I reacted, learning from it, shaping her own sense of safety from whatever I gave her. So I nodded slowly, more certain in the motion than I felt inside. "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We are going to find somewhere warm, okay?" And she nodded back, trusting me again without question. And that trust felt heavier than anything else in the car, heavier than the empty gas tank, heavier than the silence, because I knew I could not break it, not now, not after everything she had already seen. And I turned the key fully this time, the engine coughing once before settling into a low, uneven hum, and I checked the gauge again, knowing we had maybe 10 miles, maybe less, depending on how lucky we were, and I shifted the car into drive, my eyes flicking once more to the mirror out of habit. And this time, The SUV moved, just slightly, just enough that I noticed, just enough that it no longer felt like coincidence, and my pulse quickened in response, that same instinct rising again, the one that told me to stay alert, to be careful. But the vehicle did not speed up, did not rush toward us, it simply rolled forward at a distance, its headlights still dim, maintaining space like it was not trying to catch up, just trying to keep up, and I told myself again that it meant nothing, that I was imagining patterns where there were none, but something deep inside me did not believe that, not completely, and I pulled out of the parking lot slowly, merging onto the empty road, the city lights stretching ahead in soft reflections on wet asphalt, and for the first time in hours, we were moving again, even if I did not know where we were going, even if I did not know why that car was still behind us, keeping the same distance, never too close, never too far, like it had already decided we were not leaving its sight. I drove without a destination, just following the road as it stretched ahead in long, empty lines, the wet pavement reflecting streetlights in broken gold streaks that blurred every time I blinked too slowly. And I kept my hands steady on the wheel even though my mind kept drifting back to the same thing, that black SUV still behind us, not close enough to feel threatening, not far enough to ignore, just there, constant, deliberate. And I told myself again to focus on what I could control, the road, the gas, Lily, because panic would not get us anywhere, but awareness might, and I adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, pretending it was for visibility while I checked the distance again, counting seconds between turns, watching for any change in pattern, anything that would tell me if this was coincidence or something else, and it followed, not aggressively, not weaving or rushing, just staying aligned with every turn I made like it already knew where I was going even though I did not. And that realization sent a quiet tension through my chest that I could not ignore anymore, so I slowed slightly as we approached a small gas station on the corner, the kind that stayed open late with harsh fluorescent lights and a single clerk behind thick glass. Not ideal, but it was something, and more importantly, it was public, visible, and I pulled in slowly, the tires crunching lightly over gravel as I parked near the pump even though I knew we barely had enough to justify it, and I turned off the engine, sitting still for a second as the silence settled again, heavier now, more aware, and Lily looked up at me, her expression soft, but searching. "Is this where we stop?" she asked, and I nodded, forcing calm into my voice, "Just for a minute," I said, reaching for my wallet again even though I already knew what was inside, and I opened the door, the cool air hitting my face as I stepped out, grounding me instantly in the present, in something real, and I moved around to her side, opening the door carefully and helping her down, keeping one hand on her shoulder a second longer than necessary, not because she needed it, but because I did, because it reminded me why I was still standing here making decisions instead of giving up, and as we walked toward the store entrance, I felt it again, that shift in the air. That awareness of being watched, and I did not have to turn around to know the SUV had followed us in. I could feel it in the way the silence changed, in the way my instincts sharpened, and still, I kept walking, steady, controlled, refusing to show fear. Because fear invited attention, and attention was the last thing I could afford, and inside, the fluorescent lights were too bright, too clean compared to everything outside, and I guided Lily toward the small aisle with snacks, scanning quickly for something cheap. Something that would last, calculating prices in seconds like I had done too many times before, and I grabbed a small bottle of water and a pack of crackers, enough to get us through the night, maybe, and when I turned toward the counter, that was when I saw him, not fully, not clearly at first, just a figure near the entrance, tall, still, dressed in something dark that did not belong to this place, and there was something about the way he stood. The way the clerk behind the glass avoided looking at him directly, that made everything inside me go quiet, the kind of quiet that came before understanding, and I felt Lily's hand tighten around mine just slightly, not in fear, but in awareness. Like she sensed it too, that this moment was not ordinary, that something had shifted again, and when I finally lifted my eyes fully to meet his, I realized one thing with absolute certainty: he had not followed us by accident. For a second, Neither of us moved. Not me, not him, not even the air between us, and it felt like the entire room had shifted its attention to something unspoken, something quiet, but heavy, the kind of tension that did not need words to exist. And I tightened my grip on Lily's hand just slightly, grounding myself, reminding myself that I was not here alone, that every decision I made now had to pass through one simple rule: keep her safe, and I forced myself to step forward toward the counter, breaking whatever invisible line had formed, because standing still would only make it worse, would only confirm that I had noticed him too much, and I could not afford to show that, not to a man who clearly noticed everything. And as I placed the water and crackers on the counter, I kept my eyes forward. On the scratched surface, on the small digital display that flickered slightly as the clerk rang up the total, but I could feel it, his presence moving closer, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate, controlled, like every step had already been decided before it happened, and the sound of his shoes against the tile floor was soft, almost lost under the hum of the fluorescent lights, but I heard it anyway. I felt it, and Lily shifted beside me, pressing closer without looking back, her instinct mirroring mine in a way that made my chest tighten again, because she understood more than she should, and that thought stayed with me as the clerk mumbled the price, something under $10, something manageable, and I reached into my wallet, pulling out the bills with fingers that refused to shake, because I would not let them, not here, not now. And just as I handed the money over, his voice came, low, calm, closer than I expected. "You are counting every dollar," he said. Not a question, not even curiosity, just an observation stated like fact, and I froze for half a second before I forced myself to turn, meeting his gaze directly this time, because avoiding it would only give him more power. And up close, he was exactly what I had already sensed: composed, controlled, the kind of man who did not need to raise his voice to be heard, his eyes steady, focused, taking in everything at once without missing detail. And I lifted my chin slightly, keeping my voice neutral. "Everyone counts," I replied, simple, careful, not giving more than necessary. And for a moment, something flickered in his expression, not surprise, not amusement, something quieter, like acknowledgement, and his gaze shifted briefly to Lily, then back to me, and there was something different in it now, something sharper, more intentional. "Not like that," he said quietly, and I did not respond, because I did not know how, and more importantly, I did not know what he wanted. And that uncertainty was more dangerous than anything else. And the clerk pushed the change toward me, his hands moving a little too fast, like he wanted this moment to end as much as I did, and I took it, sliding the bills back into my wallet before picking up the bag, my focus already shifting to leaving, to getting back to the car, to putting distance between us and whatever this was. But as I turned, his voice came again, softer this time, but no less certain. "You are not safe out there," and the words stopped me, not because they were loud, but because they were true in a way I had been trying not to think about. And I glanced back at him, my guard rising instantly. "You do not know anything about me," I said, quieter now, but firmer, and his response came without hesitation, without effort. "I know enough," and something in the way he said it made the room feel smaller, like the distance I had been trying to maintain did not exist anymore. And for the first time since we left that parking lot, I realized that whatever this was, it was no longer something I could simply drive away from. I did not answer him right away, not because I did not have something to say, but because every instinct I had was telling me that whatever I said next mattered more than I understood. And I shifted the bag slightly in my hand, feeling the light weight of it, the reminder of how little I had to work with. And I glanced down at Lily for just a second, just enough to see her watching me, not him, me, waiting to see what I would do. And that was when I realized this was not just about me anymore. It never had been. So I straightened slightly, pulling my shoulders back in a way that felt stronger than I felt inside, and I met his gaze again, steady this time. "Then say it," I said quietly, the words leaving my mouth before I could second-guess them. What exactly do you think you know? And there was a brief pause, not awkward, not uncertain, just measured, like he had expected that response and had already decided how he would answer, and he looked at me for a moment longer before his eyes moved, not to my face, but lower, to my wrist where my sleeve had shifted just enough when I reached for my wallet earlier, and I felt it instantly. That subtle exposure, that small detail I had been trying to hide without thinking about it, and I resisted the urge to pull my sleeve down immediately. Because that would confirm it, would give him exactly what he was looking for, and instead I held still, forcing myself not to react, even as something tight coiled in my chest, and when his voice came again, it was softer, but sharper. "I know you did not leave because you wanted to," he said, and the words landed heavier than I expected because they were not invasive, they were accurate, and that made them harder to dismiss, harder to deflect, and I swallowed slowly. My fingers tightening just slightly around Lily's hand as I shook my head once. "You are making assumptions," I replied, keeping my tone controlled even though my pulse had picked up again, and for a moment, something like patience crossed his expression, not frustration, not insistence, just quiet certainty. "No," he said, almost calmly, "I am recognizing patterns," and that word stayed with me, patterns, because it implied experience, familiarity, like this was not new to him. Like he had seen versions of this before, and that realization unsettled me more than his presence alone, because it meant he was not guessing, he was reading, and I did not know how much he could see, and before I could respond again, Lily shifted closer to me, her small voice breaking the tension in a way only she could. "Mommy, can we go?" she whispered, not scared, just tired, just ready to leave, and I nodded immediately, grateful for the interruption, for the excuse. "Yes," I said softly, squeezing her hand once before turning back toward the door, my focus returning to what mattered, getting her out of here, away from this conversation, away from him, because whatever he thought he knew, whatever he was implying, I was not ready to deal with it, not tonight, not like this, and I took a step forward, then another, the distance between us increasing with each movement, but just as my hand reached for the door, his voice came one last time, not louder, not urgent, just certain in a way that made it impossible to ignore. "If you go back to that road," he said, "you will run out of options before morning," and I stopped, not turning around, not immediately, but I felt it, the weight of those words settling somewhere deeper than I wanted to admit, because they were not a threat, they were a statement. And something in me knew he was not wrong, and that was the part that scared me the most. I did not turn around right away, but I did not move forward either, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know, because I had already heard him, already understood what he meant, even if I did not want to admit it. And the cold air from outside slipped in as I pushed the door open just enough to let Lily step through first, her small hand still wrapped around mine, trusting, always trusting, and I followed her out into the dim glow of the gas station lights, the hum of the overhead fixtures louder now, sharper, like the world had come back into focus after something had shifted inside me, and I walked her back to the car without looking behind me, not once, even though I could feel it, that presence, still there, still watching. But this time it felt different, not just observation, something more deliberate, like a decision had been made and I was just now catching up to it, and I opened the passenger door, helping Lily climb in, pulling her seatbelt across her chest with steady hands, making sure it clicked into place before I closed the door gently, taking a second longer than necessary before stepping away, because I needed that moment, that small pause to think, to breathe, to figure out what I was about to do next. And I leaned against the side of the car briefly, my eyes lifting toward the dark sky where the rain had finally slowed to almost nothing, just a few drops falling here and there, and for a second, everything felt still again, but not empty, not uncertain like before. This was a different kind of stillness, one that came before a decision, and I knew I could get in the car right now, drive away, pretend none of this happened, pretend he was just another stranger who noticed too much. But the problem was, his words had settled somewhere deeper than I could ignore. Because he was right, not about everything, not about me, but about one thing that mattered. I was running out of options, and I could feel it in the way my chest tightened when I thought about the miles ahead, the empty tank, the lack of a destination. The reality that I could not keep driving forever, and I closed my eyes briefly, pressing my palm against the cool metal of the car, grounding myself in something real, something steady, and when I opened them again, I turned, slowly this time. Not out of fear, not out of hesitation, but because I needed to see him again, needed to understand what this was, and he was there, exactly where I expected, standing just outside the entrance, not approaching, not retreating, just waiting. Like he had all the time in the world, like this moment would happen exactly the way he intended no matter how long it took, and I took a step toward him, then another, each movement measured, controlled, even as my pulse picked up again, and when I stopped. A few feet away, the distance between us felt smaller than before, not physically, but something else had shifted, something internal, something I could not undo now, and I met his gaze again, holding it without looking away, because this time, I was not trying to avoid him, I was choosing to face him, and my voice came out quieter than before, but steadier. "You keep saying I am not safe," I said, "so what exactly are you offering?" And there was no surprise in his expression, no hesitation. Just that same calm certainty that had been there from the beginning, and he looked at me for a moment longer before answering, his voice low, even, like this was already decided. "A way out," he said. And something in the simplicity of that answer made everything else fall silent, because it was not complicated, it was not layered with conditions or pressure, it was just there, clear and direct, and I stood there for a second longer, feeling the weight of it. The risk, the unknown, everything. That came with trusting someone I did not know, but also the reality of what would happen if I did not, and behind me, in that car, was the only thing that mattered, the only reason I was still standing here choosing between fear and something else I could not yet define, and for the first time since this night began, I realized I was not just trying to survive anymore, I was trying to decide who I trusted to help me do it. For a moment, I did not answer him, not because I did not understand, but because I understood too well, and that made it harder, because a way out always came with a cost, even when it was not spoken out loud, and I held his gaze, searching for something. A sign, a flaw, anything that would tell me this was a mistake, but there was nothing careless in him, nothing uncertain, just that same quiet control that made everything feel like it was already decided long before I stepped into this moment, and I shifted my weight slightly, aware of the distance between us, aware of Lily sitting just a few feet away in the car behind me, and I turned my head briefly, just enough to check on her, to make sure she was still there, still safe. Her small silhouette visible through the window as she watched me, not afraid, just waiting, and that look settled something inside me, because this was never about me being comfortable, it was about her being protected, and when I turned back to him, my voice came out softer, but more direct than before. "Nothing comes for free," I said, not accusing, just stating what I had learned the hard way, and something shifted in his expression again. Not irritation, not denial, just a quiet acknowledgement. Like he respected the fact that I said it out loud, and he nodded once, slow, deliberate. "No," he said, "it does not," and there was no hesitation in that answer, no attempt to soften it, which somehow made it more honest than anything else he had said so far, and I exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision pressing in from all sides now, because walking away meant uncertainty, risk, running until I had nowhere left to go, but staying here, stepping into whatever this was, meant trusting someone I did not know, someone who clearly lived in a world far from mine, and that difference was not small, it was everything, and I felt it in the way he stood, the way the air seemed to shift around him, the way even the clerk inside had avoided looking at him directly, like he understood something I did not, and I took a small step closer without realizing it, closing the distance just enough to make this feel real, and my voice dropped slightly, more serious now. "Then say it clearly," I said. "What does it cost?" And for the first time, he did not answer immediately, not because he did not have one, but because he was choosing how to say it, and that pause told me more than anything else could. Because it meant this mattered, and when he finally spoke, His voice was lower, steadier. "It costs you the idea that you can handle this alone," he said, and I blinked, not expecting that, not expecting something so simple and yet so personal. And I felt something shift inside me again, something I had been holding onto too tightly, because he was not asking for money, not asking for anything I could measure. He was asking for something else entirely, something harder to give up: control. Independence, the belief that I could fix everything myself if I just tried hard enough, and that realization unsettled me in a different way, because it meant this was not a transaction, it was a choice, and I turned my head again, looking at the car. At Lily, at the only constant in my life right now, and I saw her watching me, her small face calm but curious, like she trusted me to choose correctly, like she believed I would not let anything bad happen, and I realized then that I had already made the decision before I even understood it, because staying meant I could not protect her alone, but leaving meant I might not be able to protect her at all, and when I looked back at him, there was no hesitation left in my voice, no uncertainty in my posture, just a quiet resolve that surprised even me. "If I say yes," I said, "this does not change later," and he did not smile, did not soften. He simply met my gaze with the same steady certainty as before and said, "No." And something about that answer, that finality, made everything else fall into place, because it meant this was not temporary, not conditional. This was a line, a choice that would shift everything after it, and I stood there for one last second, feeling the weight of it settle, before I nodded once, small but certain, and in that moment, I stepped into something I could not take back. I felt it the moment I nodded, not relief, not immediately, but something quieter, deeper, like a shift beneath my feet that I could not see but knew was there, and he did not react the way I expected. No dramatic change, no visible satisfaction. Just a single, almost imperceptible incline of his head, like this outcome had always been part of the plan, and that realization should have unsettled me, but it did not as much as it should have, because for the first time in hours, maybe longer, I did not feel like I was standing on the edge of something about to collapse, and he stepped back slightly, giving me space without being asked, his voice calm, controlled. "Get your things," he said, and there was no urgency in it, no pressure, just direction. And I turned without arguing, without questioning, because I had already crossed the line where hesitation mattered, and I walked back to the car, each step feeling more certain than the last, like my body had accepted the decision. Before my mind fully caught up, and when I opened the passenger door, Lily looked up at me immediately, her eyes searching mine, not for explanation, just for confirmation, and I smiled, small but real this time, brushing her hair back gently. "We are going somewhere better," I said softly, and she nodded without asking anything else, trusting the words the same way she always had, and I helped her unbuckle, lifting her slightly as she stepped out, her small hand slipping into mine again like it belonged there, and I grabbed the few things we had, my bag from the back seat, the jacket draped over the console, nothing more, because there was nothing more to take, and when I closed the door, I hesitated for just a second, my hand resting against the worn metal, looking at the car that had carried us this far, that had been enough until it was not, and then I let go, because holding on to it would not change anything, and I turned back toward him, walking with a steadiness I did not recognize in myself until now, and he was already moving, not waiting for me to catch up, but not leaving me behind either, just setting a pace that assumed I would follow, and I did, because I had chosen to, and as we approached the black SUV, the one that had been there from the beginning, I saw it differently now. Not as something unknown or threatening, but as a door I had already stepped through without realizing it, and he opened the rear door without a word, his movement precise, effortless, and I guided Lily inside first, helping her settle into the seat. The interior quiet, warm, nothing like the car we had just left, and I followed after her, sitting close enough to feel her shoulder against mine, grounding myself again in what mattered, and when the door closed, the outside noise disappeared almost completely, replaced by a stillness that felt controlled, intentional, and for a moment, I just sat there, taking it in, the difference, the shift, The reality that this was happening, that I had chosen this path without knowing where it led, and the driver's door opened, then closed, and I felt the subtle movement as the engine came to life, smooth, quiet, nothing like before, and as the car began to move, pulling away from the gas station, from everything we had been just an hour ago. I looked down at Lily, who leaned into me without hesitation, her eyes already closing, her breathing steady, like she finally felt safe enough to rest, and I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close, my gaze lifting toward the window where the city lights passed by in soft, distant streaks, and I realized something then, something I had not allowed myself to believe until this moment. He had not asked for my trust. He had not tried to convince me. He had simply removed every reason I had to say no. And as the road stretched ahead into the unknown, I understood that whatever came next, I was no longer running from something, I was moving toward it.